Welcome to Declassified. I'm author Daniel P. Douglas. In this series, we reveal real Cold War secrets and excavate the classified details your government hoped you'd never discover. And here we go. It was September 17th, 1947, the 160th anniversary of the signing of the Constitution. At Philadelphia's Broad Street station, a red, white, and blue locomotive sat gleaming on the tracks, its engine emblazoned with the spirit of 1776. Inside, seven armor-plated, bulletproof, fireproof railroad cars, behind glass cases guarded by United States Marines in dress blues, sat the original Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. The government was sending freedom on a road trip. This wasn't a museum exhibit, it was a Cold War weapon. Attorney General Tom Clark had designed the Freedom Train as, in his own words, a tool for aiding the country in its internal war against subversive elements. An advertising executive described it more plainly: a campaign to sell America to Americans. Over the next 16 months, the train would visit 322 cities in all 48 states. More than 3.5 million Americans would file through its cars, getting an average of 3 seconds to look at each exhibit. They would sign a freedom pledge. They would listen to an anthem written by Irving Berlin and recorded by Bing Crosby and the Andrews Sisters. What they would not know is that the man who built this rolling temple to liberty was simultaneously building one of the most comprehensive political blacklists in American history. The same Attorney General who told America that freedom was everybody's job was compiling a secret list of organizations whose members could be fired from government employment for their beliefs. All aboard the Freedom Train. Leave your irony at the station. The whole thing started with a government employee eating lunch at the wrong place. William Koblenz was a junior official in the Department of Justice's Public Information Division. He spent his lunch breaks at the National Archives, staring at founding documents most Americans would never see. One day, he had a thought. What if the documents went to the people instead? The idea climbed the chain until it landed on the desk of Attorney General Tom Clark. Clark saw something bigger than a traveling museum. He saw a weapon. The Cold War was just getting started. Republicans had taken Congress by accusing Democrats of being soft on communism. Workers were striking in record numbers. Clark believed something dramatic was needed to remind Americans what they were supposed to be fighting for. His original vision included Nazi artifacts displayed alongside American founding documents. The planners dropped that angle early on and focused on something cleaner. As Clark himself wrote, indoctrination in democracy is the essential catalytic agent needed to blend our various groups into one American family. Indoctrination. His word, not mine. The Treasury was broke, so Clark called in favors. Within weeks, some of the most powerful men in America formed the American Heritage Foundation to run the show. The board read like a Cold War power directory, the president of Chase National Bank and brother-in-law to J.D. Rockefeller Jr. as chairman, the chairman of the Rockefeller Foundation, John Foster Dulles, soon to be Secretary of State, the CEO of General Electric, and the president of the Motion Picture Association of America. Hollywood and Wall Street working together to sell patriotism to the heartland. The advertising machine was enormous. The Advertising Council, which had just changed its name from the War Advertising Council, orchestrated the campaign. Look magazine printed 775,000 copies of a booklet called Our American Heritage. The council produced 1.5 million copies of a pamphlet called Good Citizen. There were radio programs, comic books, films, and organized rededication weeks in every city the train visited. The Good Citizen exhibit defined proper American manhood as wearing suits and proper American womanhood as raising children and dressing well. Freedom, it turned out, looked a lot like buying things. The train itself was a 7-car beast hauled by a 2,000 horsepower Alco diesel locomotive. 3 cars were converted into armor plated exhibit halls. The remaining 4 housed the Marine Guard detail and crew. The cargo was staggering: 132 original documents and artifacts, including Jefferson's draft of the Declaration of Independence, the Mayflower Compact, the original Star Spangled Banner manuscript, Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, the Emancipation Proclamation, the log of the USS Missouri recording the Japanese surrender, and the flag that Marines raised on Iwo Jima. In a move that would horrify modern archivists, these priceless originals were loaded onto a train and sent bouncing across 37,000 miles of American railroad track for over a year. At each stop, visitors lined up for hours. Marines hurried them through at 1,200 people per hour, roughly 3 seconds per exhibit. 3 seconds to contemplate the Declaration of Independence. 3 seconds to absorb the Bill of Rights. Then out the door, past the souvenir stand, and into the Freedom Pledge line, where they promised to pay my taxes understandingly and dutifully accept my responsibilities in time of war. By the end of the tour, 3.5 million people had signed. The government had the receipts. What the foundation chose to leave off the train was just as revealing as what they put on it. The National Archives proposed including Executive Order 8802, one of the first federal actions against racial discrimination in hiring. The foundation rejected it. They excluded documents about collective bargaining, labor rights, and civil rights. The Truman Doctrine made the cut. The Wagner Labor Act did not. Freedom, as curated for this train, meant freedom from communism. It did not mean freedom from your boss. But the biggest contradiction wasn't in the exhibit cases, it was in the crowds waiting to see them. As the Freedom Train headed south, a question hung over every stop. Would Black Americans and white Americans be allowed to view the founding documents together? The foundation had announced a policy requiring integrated viewing. All citizens must have equal opportunity to view historic documents of our American heritage, the organizers declared. To do otherwise would violate the spirit of these documents. Memphis tested that promise first. Mayor James Pleasants announced that Black visitors would only be allowed aboard during separate viewing hours. The foundation told Memphis to integrate or lose the train. Pleasants refused. The Freedom Train skipped Memphis. Then came Birmingham. Public Safety Commissioner Eugene Bull Connor, the same man who would later turn fire hoses and police dogs on civil rights marchers, demanded separate lines for Black and white visitors. The foundation canceled Birmingham too. Every other southern city on the route, faced with the choice between integration and embarrassment, grudgingly allowed mixed viewing. In Montgomery, Alabama, activists Edgar Nixon and Rosa Parks fought for and won desegregated access to the train. That was 8 years before the Montgomery bus boycott. But the foundation's stand on integration had its own limits. The Board of Trustees had rejected every proposed African American member before the train launched. Walter White of the NAACP was turned down. A. Philip Randolph, the labor leader, was turned down. They didn't add a Black trustee until after the tour was already underway. The organization demanding integration of its audiences couldn't bring itself to integrate its own leadership. Not everyone was buying what the Freedom Train was selling. Langston Hughes saw the contradictions and put them into verse. His poem, Freedom Train, published in October 1947 in the Black magazine Our World, asked the questions the foundation didn't want to hear. He wrote about Jim Crow train cars and segregated stations, asked if a Black man could drive the Freedom Train or if he was still just a porter, and asked what would happen when the train rolled through Mississippi. Paul Robeson recorded the poem and performed it at concerts across the country through 1960. In Philadelphia, the Communist Party planned what the press called a substantial scheme to sabotage the tour, calling it a propaganda stunt by big business. At both Philadelphia and New York, protesters showed up to point out contradictions between the documents on the train and the reality of American democracy. The government's response was instructive. J. Edgar Hoover's FBI tracked the protesters. Between September and October 1947, Hoover sent 9 separate reports to Attorney General Clark about people who had shown up to exercise the very freedoms the train was celebrating. The man who built the Freedom Train had the FBI watching anyone who questioned it. Here is where the story turns from irony into something darker. In March 1947, President Truman signed Executive Order 9835, the Loyalty Order, establishing the first program to screen federal employees for political disloyalty. It authorized the FBI to run name checks on millions of Americans and created the framework for the Attorney General's list of subversive organizations. The man who administered that list was Tom Clark, the same Tom Clark who built the Freedom Train. In April 1947, while the train was being designed, Clark's office asked the FBI for a list of organizations thought to be subversive. By December, while the Freedom Train was rolling through the South, Clark released the expanded list. It eventually included 90 groups. Membership in any of them could get you fired. The list included not just the Communist Party and the Ku Klux Klan, but the American Youth Congress, the National Negro Congress, and dozens of civil rights and labor organizations. Over 5 million federal workers underwent loyalty screenings under the program Clark helped create. Roughly 2,700 were fired. Another 12,000 resigned under pressure. Historian David McCullough called the loyalty program the most reprehensible political decision of Truman's presidency. So, let the dates sink in. In the spring and summer of 1947, the same Attorney General was simultaneously building a rolling shrine to the Bill of Rights and building a blacklist that punished Americans for exercising those rights. One hand held the Declaration of Independence up to the light, the other hand signed the papers that destroyed careers. Clark later called the Freedom Train an effort to promote the loyalty it is known they have for the American way of life. He did not specify which version of loyalty he meant. The Freedom Train ended its tour on January 22, 1949, rolling into Washington for Truman's inauguration week. The documents went back to the National Archives. The 3.5 million signatures were delivered to the Library of Congress. The Advertising Council declared it a success. It was, by some measures, a remarkable achievement. The train had forced integration in dozens of southern cities. Rosa Parks had stood in an integrated line in Montgomery years before she refused to give up her seat on a bus. The foundation's executive vice president argued that the cancellation at Memphis has had a better educational impact than the appearance of the train itself. But the Freedom Train also stands as one of the Cold War's most perfectly constructed contradictions, a celebration of liberty funded by the nation's most powerful corporations, a call for free speech monitored by the FBI, a declaration that all citizens have equal rights organized by a board that initially rejected every black candidate, a shrine to the Bill of Rights conceived by the architect of a political blacklist. In 2026, as America celebrates its 250th birthday, the National Archives has launched a freedom plane to fly founding documents around the country. The railroad gave way to the runway, but the questions Langston Hughes asked in 1947 haven't changed. Who gets to define freedom? Who gets to see it? And who's watching the people who ask? The Freedom Train was real. The freedom it celebrated was real. The hypocrisy was also real. And the receipts are in a filing cabinet in College Park, Maryland, stamped with the seal of the National Archives, waiting for someone to read them. The train has left the station, and the contradictions are still on board. And there it is, Another documented descent into the declassified, filed properly, stamped accordingly, and revealed at last. Be sure to check out my Substack, The Intelligence Bulletin from author Daniel P. Douglas, for other podcast series, written articles, and links to all my books. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.